Grüezi miteinander. Welcome to the first virtual kickoff of the Aviation and Space Symposium in St. Gallen. My name is Andreas Wittmer. I'm head of the Aviation Research Center at the University of St. Gallen and organizer of this event. We are here virtually with all of you logged in with us as it wasn't possible to be here in person. You know, we tried to organize this last year, then we had to move it by 1 year to today's date. Now we are here again. At least we have 2 hours together virtually, and next year on the 2nd of June, please note the 2nd of June next year, we will have the Aviation and Space Symposium, hopefully then in St. Gallen in person, and have more options and chances to discuss and network and meet each other. I would like to warmly welcome today's speakers. Next to me in the room, the panelists in the room, they will be introduced later when they speak. I would like to welcome the sponsors of this event. We have a series of sponsors which we found not only for this event, but for quite many events. We organized quite a lot of events the next 3 years and found sponsors. To the technology, I cannot change the slides. I would also welcome you again for today's kickoff meeting of this event. So 2 years ago, the Center for Aviation Competence of the University of St. Gallen, together with the Olma Messen in St. Gallen, decided to organize one of these symposiums, a first symposium, and create a new platform for discussion on high level. So we wanted to have a strategic platform for strategic discussions about the future of aviation and space industries, as we are in industries here which are challenged. We have a huge challenge right now. We are in the middle of a crisis, or we are maybe getting out of a crisis, you all know, but we also have other challenges in front of us. This industry is facing bigger change in the next just few years, but also in the next 10, 20 years. Just think about the environmental issues we are having. So we thought it may be relevant to have a platform where academia, practice, industry can exchange and learn from each other. We transfer knowledge from the academic world into practice, but practice, the industry gives us the opportunity to have the right questions to work on and to give us the right fruits for thought in our research centers. So why an Aviation and Space Symposium in St. Gallen? I think that's why. That's why we thought we want to do something, but there are more reasons than that. The presenter is not really working, but I'm moving on. So we have more reasons than that. We have a history in St. Gallen, and a great aviation history. So as early as in 1913, we have first aviation movements in St. Gallen, but most important, Walter Mittelholzer, who founded in 1919 Adastra Aero and later on merged together with Balair into Swissair in 1931. Walter Mittelholzer was born in St. Gallen. It's a St. Gallen person, and it went on from that. In the early days, we had an airport in St. Gallen. We had the Breitfeld. On Breitfeld, Henry Kunkler made some test flights, a true pioneer, and then offered flights from St. Gallen to Zurich to Basel, one of the first airlines within Switzerland offering certain connections. Then Breitfeld Airport was moved to Altenrhein in 1931. Altenrhein Airport still exists today. Altenrhein became a center for aviation development. Dornier came to Altenrhein, and the famous DO-X plane was produced there and flown at the Lake Constance. Then later, many other planes were developed, also gliders, but also the famous P-16, a military jet, which was the basis for the later Learjet, which is still a business jet today, produced today. So for this reason, we thought, well, there is a reason to actually be prominent in St. Gallen about aviation. And this in connection with 15 years of anniversary and 15 years of aviation research at the University of St. Gallen really made us think about this symposium. And that's why we are where we are right now and have a new platform for exchange. The Center for Aviation Competence in its 15 years achieved a lot. We got great support from the University of St. Gallen. University of St. Gallen was the platform provider for us to develop. We are grateful about that. And I'm also very grateful, of course, that we have even the rector today with us. I'm going to introduce him in just a minute. But we did a lot of work, obviously. We had to. We did research, we did training, we did education. We have 2 long-standing master courses at the university. We have public lecture series. We have a forum for more than a decade about risk, safety, and liability. We have a certificate of advanced studies in global aviation management for almost a decade. We have a very new management check-in program for pilots to help pilots to reorganize and maybe rearrange their careers in difficult times. We have an aviation series with 16 books, which we have published. We have 2 textbooks for students and practice, the aviation system book, Management of the Aviation Value Chain. The 2nd edition is in print now. And we have the Aviation Risk and Safety Management book, which we have published. And last but not least, we have the great support of the Foundation for Aviation Competence, which was founded a couple of years ago, which helps us through the times of research and gives us the opportunity to also research without having always a direct link to certain funds or payments. And that makes us also, makes it possible to us to have independent research. So with this, I would like to move over and come to the panelists and first the welcome speeches. I'm very glad we have 3 welcome speeches here today. I'm very glad to first introduce Bernhard Ehrenzeller, Professor Bernhard Ehrenzeller, who is rector of the University of St. Gallen and gives us the honor to send a few words to us. I'm really grateful you're here, that you have time for us in your busy schedule, and please come here to the stage and say your words.
Thank you very much, Andreas Widmer. What an interesting history you told us about this center and St. Gallen as the origin of all that. Good morning, dear guests, and above all, happy birthday to the team of Competence, Center of Aviation Competence, HSG. It is with great joy that I extend my congratulations on 16 years of successful aviation research and education. Naturally, we would have preferred to properly celebrate the center's 15th anniversary last year, but as we all know, history happened. And there are indeed few other fields that have been as challenged by the global COVID-19 pandemic as the aviation sector. Since I'm among experts here, I refrain from rattling down figures that all of you are familiar with. These statistics and figures are indeed your daily business, your bread and butter. The developments in the aviation sector are a cause of concern, particularly in Switzerland, where the sight of grounded airplanes stir unwelcomed memories still. Yet, with any crisis comes the opportunity to seek new avenues and change tracks. What new avenues, you may ask? What are the learnings from the pandemic for the future? And what are the challenges for a sustainable aviation? Well, this is not for me to answer, but for the Center for Aviation Competence and the network of researchers. The profound expertise is defined by typical St. Gallen virtues: close collaboration with industry partners, paired with an astute theoretical understanding and the up-to-date methodological contact and toolkit. This way, the center has been able to establish itself as a key educator in the aviation sector, as well as a vibrant research center. The team's expertise is not only sought after by key players in the sector, but also by the media. We rarely read and hear about developments in the aviation, on news without Dr. Andreas Wittmer providing us with important insights. St. Gallen may not have its own airport. It had one, as we heard, but it is still a hub for aviation expertise. 16 years ago, the idea of a center for aviation competence took flight, and it will continue to soar. Orville Wright famously said, "The airplane stays up because it doesn't have time to fall." The Center for Aviation Competence will be still successful because it is needed and more needed than ever. My congratulations on 16 successful years, and my heartfelt thanks to the whole team of the center and its foundation and its affiliated researchers for making St. Gallen a fixture for aviation. I wish you an inspiring kickoff on the Aviation and Space Symposium. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much for your very kind word, Bernhard Ehrenzeller. It's very nice to hear that we are welcome at university and to be honored with your nice words. Thank you very much. I have a second welcome speech ready for you participants. It's the presentation by Dr. Hans Werder. He is the president of the Aviation Research Center Switzerland. I just saw the slides have popped up. Hans, I'm very happy to have you here. You came to St. Gallen. Hans has been the former General Secretary of Minister of Transport and brings his great network into this research center, this Aviation Research Center. It's a Swiss Aviation Research Center. It's a collaboration of universities and research centers on aviation. So we're trying to bundle our research activities across Switzerland, and Hans is really supporting us greatly with his network and by organizing us. Hans, I'm very glad you're here, and I would like to thank you for doing what you do for actually us as research institutes.
Thank you very much, Andreas. Good morning. I'd like to give you some short informations on ARCS. Andreas Wittmer has mentioned it. ARCS, the Aviation Research Center Switzerland, is the national network for aviation research. Its members are the Swiss universities working in this field. ARCS also attaches great importance to close cooperation with the Swiss Aviation sorry, now I have to. Okay, yeah, here you see. All important stakeholders are represented in the innovation board of ARCS: airlines, airports, Sky Guide, Air Force, Arma Swiss, FOCA, business aviation. The mandate of ARCS has been formulated by the Federal Council. In its Aviation Policy Report 2016, the Federal Council states that the international presence of Switzerland is rather modest, rather low. And then the government gives the following mandate to ARCS. I quote that in German: Die Schweiz soll zu einem bedeutenden Standort für Luftfahrtforschung und Entwicklung werden. Das Aviation Research Center Switzerland wird in Zukunft die Koordination von aviatischen Projekten wahrnehmen. Swiss aviation is facing different challenges, short term, long term. Here some keywords: sustainable aviation, new aviation infrastructure, Avistrat, digital transformation, long-term competitiveness, and of course, safety, security, and efficiency. We firmly believe that research and development can make a decisive contribution to address all these challenges. ARCS is working on two levels. On the first level, we are carrying out concrete project, and on the second level, we develop a national research plan, which is still missing. Here you see a list of our current research projects. you see drones, competitiveness of Swiss aviation, a project of the Hochschule St. Gallen, Avistrat Switzerland, the sustainable aviation, which has been finished and published just last week. And then we have a new drone project, which is actually at FOCA. The second level, the National Research Plan. Switzerland does, in contrast to many other, also small European countries like Norway or Sweden, not yet have a coordinated research plan. We firmly believe that such a research plan is necessary for the development of an innovative and sustainable aviation industry in Switzerland. The draft of this research plan is actually at work. It will be presented to our innovation board on September the 8th. We are, of course, closely working with all interested scientific institutions and with the aviation industry. In parallel to this work, we are clarifying the financing of research, which is quite important, and we talking with the relevant funding institutions. Participation in this research work is, of course, welcome. If you are interested, please contact Professor Michel Guillaume from ZHAW in Winterthur. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much, Hans, for your kind words and the introduction to the Aviation Research Center. It is really a good initiative. I'm very proud and happy that I have been, or we have been as a center, part of this from the beginning, from the foundation of it until today. I welcome the third welcome speaker. That's the Director of the Federal Office of Civil Aviation, Christian Hegner, who should be with us virtually now. Thank you, Christian, for being with us and have time for us. We are proud to have you as a welcome speaker. I hand over to René to technology. Does it work? Great. Christian, welcome.
Thank you very much, Andreas, for your introduction. Dear Professor Ehrenzeller, dear Dr. Werder, dear Hans, dear speakers, organizers and participants. First of all, good morning from Bern, and also congratulations to your 15-year anniversary last year. If I were to name one question that people have asked me the most in the past few months, it would be that of the infamous look into the crystal ball. How will the aviation sector in 5 or 10 years look like? My answer, we do not know. We may know about the fields of activities that influence our environment, so safety and security, society and politics, innovation, regulation. We also know the broader social trends that have an impact on it. The circulating virus, vaccinations, increasing climate awareness, EU politics, and the failed institutional framework, technological developments, and digitalization, to name a few. Bringing these drivers together is key when anticipating future outcomes. Nevertheless, making a stringent outlook towards the world ahead is still impossible. It's though to make predictions, especially about the future. Mark Twain had once said. He was right. For us as regulators, confronting the future means thinking in scenarios, bringing the various pieces of complex picture together in different ways. Even if this may not necessarily lead to better predictions, it at least helps to anticipate the future more systematically and make the aviation sector less vulnerable to future events. For example, consider a scenario in which the aviation sector gets back to pre-crisis status. After the number of flights in Switzerland has dropped 64% since 2019. In this scenario, we would expect a steady growth of air traffic in the years to come. Such developments would put further pressure on our existing infrastructure. Innovative solutions would be required, as well as systematic implementation of the Federal Council's report on Swiss civil aviation policy. Considering a second scenario, flight demand does not recover due to economic, technological, societal, or political reasons. In the digital age, it has never been so easy to work from home. Business trips would decrease. In this scenario, we would need to create the necessary conditions for maintaining efficient and reliable international connectivity for Switzerland to ensure competitiveness of Swiss stakeholders. In addition, the general flight shame could further spread through society. Climate pressure would increase, leading to stricter policies that incentivize societies and the industries to change their behaviors. Against this background, we could expect faster developments of new technologies that make air mobility more innovative and sustainable. If we want to translate this assortment of scenarios into clear strategies, we need to follow a holistic and interdisciplinary approach. Holistic, as the different parameters of the scenarios illustrated before are highly interconnected. Interdisciplinary, as the many are commonly smarter than the few, especially when it comes to highly complex systems such as aviation. I illustrate that with two examples. First, SUSI. SUSI, or Swiss Use-Based Implementation, is a private-public partnership that aims to integrate civil drones in the Swiss airspace in a safe and efficient way. With the creation of SUSI, FOCO has recognized that the formalized exchange between public and private entities is key when developing innovative technologies and adequate regulatory frameworks. Similar mechanisms come into play when we look at how FOCA creates a new strategy for an innovative Swiss airspace and aviation infrastructure called Avistrat, Switzerland. With this program, we unite a range of interdisciplinary stakeholders at the same table to gain a better understanding on current trends, integrating the needs and expectations of various actors involved. Scientific research is a main driver within these processes by building the backbone of fact-based policy making. Even if these approaches may increase complexity when it comes to organization and communication, they have a positive impact on transparency and innovative thinking, suggesting a convincing way of how we will address the big problems we face in the future. Working collectively on common goals, tasks, and challenges has never been so important as today. Events such as today's Aviation and Space Symposium are therefore highly appreciated, as they actively contribute to the creation of such a participatory culture. If you are not able to predict the future, we at least can create it by being more proactive and inclusive. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very, very much, Christian, for your very nice words and insightful words. Also, words we have to think and make us think about the future. I'm really grateful that you had time to give us this insight. Thank you very much to Bern, and have a nice day. So let's move forward with our symposium and get down to the bottom of today's discussion on the panel. Short-term challenges, how to continue after COVID-19, how to restart air transport. These are burning questions. You all remember more than a year ago, it all stopped. It stopped abruptly. It went down to almost zero, and the industry was definitely moved into a completely different mode of operation. Organizations, structures, processes suddenly were different. Task forces managed organizations, ad hoc management happened, daily meetings with changes all over the world happened, and organizations had just to adapt on a daily basis. So not much of a plan. It's just daily business that had to be managed somehow. Now we are a year ahead of that very difficult situation. During this year, a lot has happened. A lot of discussions have been, we have had, a lot of research has been done. A lot of companies, consulting and university companies have provided information about how we could actually manage this industry out of the misery. So did we in St. Gallen. We did also produce some research and came to the conclusion that 20% of intercontinental business travel may be lost. And not only in the short term, but maybe in the medium term. We came to the conclusion that on a European level, we may lose about 30% of demand. We also looked into leisure, and we saw that leisure is less volatile or less a problem and comes back much faster. But in the short term, we have also less demand on leisure, but a faster recovery. And one statement we have heard the last year so many times when we did our research was, I will fly again when there is herd immunity or no quarantines. So that brings us to the linkage between government policies, states' policies, and a privately managed industry that has to live with whatever is decided in different countries on a global scale all around the world. So this is the big challenge we are facing. And by this, I think I would like to open the panel and hand over and introduce my dear colleague, Roland Müller, Professor Roland Müller from the University of St. Gallen. He is president of the Aviation Foundation, a foundation for aviation competence. He is founder of the Center for Aviation Competence together with me. I remember 16 years ago now, we had a glass of wine at the Nero Club General Assembly, and our creativity went through the roof. And the rector of the university at the time, and also a lot of professors supported us. So just 3 months after that glass of wine, we started to do aviation research in St. Gallen. Roland, I'm really happy you're here. I know you have a very busy schedule. I can say that Roland is going toward his retirement in the end of the year, but he has so many board mandates and is professor in St. Gallen and Bern and is a lawyer, and most importantly, a flight instructor, which is, I think, where your heart really is. And I know that next year you will have more time for the aviation side of all your mandates. And I'm looking forward for the next decades to come to work with you on aviation topics. And I'm sure we will have a lot of ideas what we can do in the future. I'll hand over to you to introduce the panel.
Thank you very much, Andreas Wittmer, for the kind words and the introduction. It's really a great pleasure for me to lead this panel with such prominent representatives. And it's a pity that I am allowed only for 2 questions for each participant. We would like to ask more questions. We had already good discussions before, but nevertheless, let's start with Tamur Goudarzi Pour. He is the CCO of Swiss International Airlines, and the subject of my 2 questions is the post-COVID future of airlines. So the first question is, how would Swiss or the Lufthansa Group in general respond to a new pandemic crisis, and what would be different from the response to the COVID actual pandemic?
Yeah, thanks very much for the question. I think this question alone can cover the whole symposium. And I'm sure we have a couple of exchanges on this also later here in the round. Maybe we can say there's a mix of things that we definitely would do again, the way we have done it. And there are some things we would probably do also differently. But let me maybe summarize it in 4 Ds. The first D, that's dynamic. That's for how quick you're able to change your whole flight setup, or how quick you're able to change all your asset structures, how quick you're able to actually change your commercial context and adapt nimbly to the situation that you're in. Because we all prepared for an epidemic, but never for a pandemic. And that's something like a black swan event that nobody had on the agenda. So being dynamic and reacting very quickly and fast is something that is very important. Here I can say that's what we have done. And I'm saying that is something I'm really grateful that the team in Swiss and Lufthansa Group has managed. Second D, I would call is direct and digital. And here I think very important is the trends that we have started before the crisis are valid today even more, and they accelerate. Everything that's digital and that we have not yet done is something I would invest even more into before the crisis, in every aspect of the travel journey of the customer. And direct in this case for the second year as well, because I think the exchange with the customers in both ways, a two-way street, is something that we have learned is so important, be it on your own platforms, be it in the various social media, be it in all the forms of changes that you can do. The third D, I think, is disruption, something that also started in our industry before. It's something that's less happening right now on the side of the airlines, because the airlines currently, with the money they have got, supported less presence, but mostly it's burdens for the future and for investments. But this is not changing too much right now. We will change this there probably in the future, but more on the travel retail side, where you see a lot of movement now in the value chain of retail, of travel retail, be it in intermediaries like travel agencies, be it in other forms of distribution, for example, on the global distribution systems, etc. There is a lot of change, and that's something we need to manage, we need to master. That's something we will definitely foster and accelerate also after the crisis. And the last D is for me the one of dimensioning, that you find the right dimensioning for your asset structure, for your fleet, for the whole setup of the company. Dimensioning something that you need to decide at this relatively early point without knowing all what's going to happen in the future, but you have to throw the ball and you have to at some point make decisions on the medium-term development of the company, of the industry. And here the key point is dimensioning with the flexibility that you're able actually to increase or decrease according to unknown events once you have done the exercise of dimensioning your company. So you need to be able to change course once you have made a decision, but you have to make decisions, and that's something we have done for Swiss. We have redimensioned our company. We're still in the final stages of deciding that, and we will communicate also very soon on the final outcome.
Thank you very much, Tamur. Let's link the next question to our second last response. You, as the CCO of Swiss International, you should know it. Did the current crisis cause a systemic lift, a systemic shift in the airline industry, or was it an event with a temporary impact on the commercial aviation?
I think it's clearly with the elements I mentioned before, it's a systemic shift. For sure, it's not a temporary one. And if you look at the history of the last 60 years of the average 5% growth you've seen in the industry, definitely this was a structural shift downside to the downside, and it will take years for us to recover. It will not be a quick fix. So it's something that we're tackling, and all the digital, all the disruptive, all those elements that you have seen before the crisis will accelerate. They will change. The customer, I think, will also change behavior. There will be a new notion of well-being for the customer that's more driven towards safety, security, and well-being as such. So you will see also customer behavior changes. It's not just something that is changing for us in the number of aircraft. It's definitely a structural shift in the industry, and we expect more changes to come.
So thank you very much. I have heard you have prepared some slides also for us, and I would like that Andreas, perhaps you can present some of them. Please to present it to Tamur. Yes, here we have it, because your answer is then also the next question for the COO of the Zürich Airport, because when it is a systemic shift in the whole airline industry, that has a lot of consequence also. But Tamur, please have a look at your slides. Yeah, okay, come here.
Okay. Yeah, maybe just to underline what I've just said, to show you here some figures. And we've heard before, we don't talk about prognosis, we talk about scenarios, we talk about the glass ball somewhat. And what you see here is not our figures, these are figures from the IATA. So our friend Brian Pierce and his team in IATA, he's actually doing this exercise every couple of weeks. And the new thing which you cannot see on this chart is that for the first time in the last year or so, these figures have gone up somewhat. So he is also changing a little bit more positive his outlook compared to previous outlooks or previous prognosis or previous scenarios, whatever you call it. And what you can see here is clearly that you don't see a V-shaped recovery as you see it in most of the industrialized world's economies, be it in US, be it in China, be it part of Europe, and Europe probably with a delay as well. And we see it also in Switzerland. Global industrial production is already above 2019. Here you see actually the passenger expectation for the next years, and years means up to 2030. And you can clearly see it's more like a, I would call it, famous sports brand Nike. It's a bit more the Nike type swoosh symbol in terms of recovery. And the positive side is that yes, we will reach back to the levels that we had, but it's not a question of tech so much, but more a question of time. Tech will play an important role here, as I mentioned before, but the expectation at IATA at the moment is that you reach about 105% of 2019 level in the middle of the chart in 2023 already. That's on a global scale. That does not mean that for us as a Central European group or Swiss in the heart of it is reaching that. So it depends now really on the business model of each of the carriers where they stand with this kind of development. And our prediction as Swiss is a bit more conservative. We believe around 2024 probably will reach the levels. The second question is the composition of the travel. It's also something you can't see here how much, and this was mentioned also by Andreas before, how much is actually business and how much is leisure, VFR, touristic travel. Here the structural shift that was mentioned before we see likewise. And so that's why we had to prepare for a situation where while the business is coming back slowly in the medium term, a situation where we have to also account for structural shifts. I want to show you just one more chart, which the next one is basically a chart that I'm also showing to our customers. So I think in the end, it's very important what our customer thinks and how he's reacting to the crisis. And that's the beginning of the chain. And then we all, as an industry stakeholder group here in the room, we will have to react to. And what you can see on the left upper side is where the current situation now in this summer, where the current expectation is that we will reach 50 to 55% of the ASK, so the offered seat kilometers, that's our industry KPI of 2019. This, however, assumes an opening that we have seen in the last weeks, and we have seen strong growth in the last weeks, an opening of Europe in Schengen, and also an opening of transatlantic, less so in other regions of the world because we know they're more closed. The US opening, which would be key to it, is still not decided, and we'll have to wait for the next couple of weeks if it really comes about. We see mixed signals so far. Nevertheless, we assume a certain opening, particularly for travelers from the US to Europe, either via Zurich or actually also coming to Switzerland. This still needs to be, of course, approved. So the regulatory framework for us is key. We will cover roughly 90% of our network this summer, which means that most of the destinations that we have covered before will also be covered this summer. 125, 85 from Zurich, 40 from Geneva. It means we're going for a network width and not so much for a high frequency or a network depth, meaning we try to connect Switzerland with Europe and trying to connect Switzerland with the world to the maximum of destinations, which also mean you fly less to certain destinations. Very important in the middle is, as I mentioned before, how we deal with our customers. We call it care and confidence. The customers who have flown with us, they give us very good feedback on the services and on the adjustments that we had to make due to the COVID crisis. But we, of course, have a lot of customers who have not yet flown with us. Probably every fifth customer has only flown with us. And many are now thinking of returning to the skies, particularly for the summer vacations. Many haven't had a vacation yet, and many haven't flown for almost 1 or 2 years. So it's very important to give them confidence, be it on the flexibility of our tickets, that they can be rebooked, that we have easy services in terms of information. So one point of truth on the website, for example, where we're trying to adapt to all those different regulations of 180 countries, sometimes changing by the hour, which is quite a Herculean task, I would say, but to give as much assurance as possible to the customer, and they give it back to us in good feedback when they're actually doing the flight experience. Sustainability will be definitely a topic that is started before, we mentioned it before also here in the round, it will stay with us and become even more important. And now we have the CO2 discussion in Switzerland, and we definitely have to have an industry approach to it. I think very important for us is the mixture between the new aircraft that we have invested 8 billion francs in the last Swiss francs in the last decade, less fuel consumption. Then, of course, intermodal traffic, innovative offers, particularly also in terms of recycling and less waste production. And very important, probably one of the key challenges for the future, how do we invest into sustainable aviation fuels, alternative fuels, SAF, because this is the way to go. It will take a long time, but this will be a very, very important element of the CO2 neutral policy. And our policy is to be CO2 neutral in 2050 as an aviation group and as Swiss. Let me put one more point, which I think is important for the medium term. This is actually the mentioning, what I mentioned before, which is the question of dimensioning. And you see it on the right side. And here we are currently investigating, and we still have to make a final decision. We're investigating where we would stand in the medium term in 2023. And the current plan is, as we said, we will still communicate the final outcome. The current plan is that we will reduce our fleet to around 86% of what we had in 2019. That would mean 26 long-haul aircraft based in Zurich. This was 31.5 more in 2019, and 59, that's 10 less than we had in 2019, 59 short-haul aircraft for 2023. So we basically want to be flexible afterwards. So whatever comes after 23, we need to be able to react to, also in our fleet structure. But this fleet structure will not mean many cancellations of long-haul destinations, quite the opposite. We will maintain most of them, and it will maintain also a very dense network on the intercontinental side. Basically, that's the structure size-wise we had in 2017, so not so long ago. So we believe with this structure, we will position Zurich as a premium hub in Europe with a premium airline. That's definitely our promise. Swiss will not put another course. We will not go business model-wise to another direction. We definitely believe here in the hub in Zurich, but also, of course, our positioning in Geneva and the positioning of Swiss as a premium carrier in Europe. So basically, I would like to end up with that, and maybe there's some food for thought for discussion later that we can then go more in depth to later in the discussion.
Thank you very much, Tamur Goudarzi Pour. Now we understand better your already given answers to my question. It's really a shift with the long term. I have seen that you will restructure. We hope that will be enough, but on the other side, that will have a big impact to the airport, especially to our main airport in Switzerland, the hub, the Zurich Airport. And I'm glad that Stefan Tschudin, the COO of Zurich Airport, is here. And when we have heard now the future of the airline, we are interested to hear some important keynotes from you of the future of the airport. Please, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you. And welcome also from my side, the future of airports. Maybe you can give me the next slide. Thank you. Let's start with a view from above to Zurich Airport. It's a large landmark within the canton of Zurich, close to the city of Zurich. And the canton and the city of Zurich, all the region had a very successful development over the last decades. And the good international connectivity is, of course, an important stimulator for prosperity. And I'm convinced, and we heard there are some shifts during the next year, but we heard also we expect to recover from this crisis. It takes more than other crises before. But I'm convinced that the international connectivity, as well as the development of Zurich, the airport, and Swiss Airlines is tightly linked, and I'm convinced that will be the case also in the future. I'd like to give you short view on the current situation of the airport, some traffic figures, then about the short-term challenges, how to recover from this crisis that we are still in the middle of, and of course the long-term challenges, with a few words to the climate discussion as well as the digitalization. If you see the impact on passengers and flight movements, we had last year around 8.3 million passengers compared with 31.5 million in 2019. But if you look back from March this year, 1 year, then there was only 4 million passengers. And we are still, I just have the figures from April. Also, May was down around 20% of passengers compared with 2019. And we heard we are now looking forward to July, August this year with a slow recovery up to 50% productions. We expect around 40% of the passengers, which means we still far away to come back to positive cash flow. So we are still mid in the crisis. And operationally, there was a great deal of flexibility that was required during the last month, together with our partners, ground service providers, as well as airlines. And that was a big challenge. And just let me show you a few, or just one slide also to the financial review over the last year. Of course, as probably all of us, as a first reaction to the crisis, our company cut operational costs and revised investment planning. And along the general hiring freeze, the immediate introduction of short-time work was and is still a vital instrument to compensate for the loss in revenues, as the personal costs is our largest cost position. So that is still very important. And of course, as we heard, due to the low traffic volume and the recovery phase that will take a couple of years, we were able to delay capacity-driven investments. But nevertheless, I'm convinced the passenger volumes will rebound to Zürich Airport. And most of the bigger investments in our infrastructure is driven by life cycle problems, and that can't be delayed even if we are still in a crisis. And on the capital market side, we had a strong financial situation, and we were able to significantly increase our capital reserves following 3 successful bond placements during last year with a total value of 900 million Swiss francs. But this is money that has to be paid back again. So we are also obliged to earn money as fast as possible again. And of course, as I have this conclusion, as the airlines and the whole industry, we are affected by this pandemic. And we have the challenges of quite high fixed costs. Now, what is the focus on the recovery over the next few weeks and months? And the short time, the challenges are focused on the travel restrictions, especially within Europe, but also, of course, on an intercontinental basis. And that's why we, a couple of weeks ago, launched this campaign back in the air with all the partner organizations. And for the industry, for us as the airport, the near-term recovery is vital for the future of the industry and the airport in Zurich. But the last decisions of the government of Switzerland with regard to relief in travel restrictions, especially within Europe, was an important step and gives some confidence also for the near future, for the coming months in Switzerland, July and August. As an infrastructure operator, we are as I already mentioned, naturally more focused on the long-term drivers. Projects that we implement often have a planning period of years and are subsequently in operation for over 30 or 40 years. And we heard it from Andreas, it's possible that business travel will be somewhat reduced to digital opportunities, but at the end, we still expect that also business travel will recover over the coming years. And we see especially three big drivers, that's economic growth, population growth, and international connectivity, which still will be very important also in the future. And we assume our previous demand forecasts will be probably delayed by about 5 years, maybe it can be 6 or 7 years, but at the end, on a long term, we still believe that the traffic will come back. And that's how we defined our long-term strategy in development Zurich Airport, and we still aim for a mid-sized quality hub in Europe with a quality airline. We've heard Swiss is also still believing in a hub airline business model, and so do we in Zurich. Unfortunately, politically, further expansions like it already has been realized in Europe, for example, a new airport in Munich, new parallel runways in Paris, in Frankfurt, is not able in Switzerland or has been rejected by the politics. So we are aiming on optimizing the existing infrastructure. We just announced that we will extend, or we asked to extend our runway system to get, as I have it on slide 2, safe flight operation procedures with stable capacity, independent of weather situations at Zurich. And we have today a capacity of about 66 movements, and with these optimizations, we believe that we will have 70 movements, which is still, of course, less than the major hub airports in Europe have. What will be the future? Just two probably main drivers for the near future. Of course, climate discussion will come back, or has already come back after this crisis, also for aviation industry. And assuming that we are going to see further traffic grow in the coming years, as we just discussed, the reduction of CO2 emissions to net zero by 2050 becomes even more relevant. Zurich Airport is responsible, as every airport, for the infrastructure-related CO2 emissions on the ground. And we were able to reduce our CO2 emissions well above the average of Swiss infrastructure owners over the last 3 decades. And as I have it on the slide, in absolute terms, we have halved our CO2 emissions since 1990. So our climate goals for 2030 set by the Paris Agreement have already been met, and net zero emissions by 2050 has already been part of our roadmap for a couple of years, and we have a concrete plan also how to reach this goal 2050. And of course, we heard also from Tamur's sustainable fuel. That will be a major task for the whole industry during the next years. And let me finish with a few words to digitalization challenges in the next year. Just an example, if we talk about digitalization, we also think about this touchless passenger journey, as we've heard, or biometrics. That's just one thing that the passenger always see when traveling through airports. But in the fact, we have especially tasks to improve our efficiency, as we are not able to build new runways. The capacity peaks or the restrictions on capacity will be a big challenge. So we have to improve our processes and improve the efficiency. And that's possible with artificial intelligence. And just two examples, we have this so-called AOP, an airport operation plan, that we are now working a project together with our hub airline as well as ground handler. And that means a single, common and collaboratively agreed rolling plan available to all stakeholders to improve decisions and all make these decisions on the same basis. And of course, in the future, in the next step, proactively control all the processes over the next 24 or even 48 hours to improve efficiency. And this picture is from Heathrow. We have already an airport steering, and this APOC, Airport Operations Center, we will expand our steering to have most of the important partners also in the same group. So to finish, I'm convinced that airports were and are Europe's mobility hubs, and I'm convinced that it's also right to stick to our business model that we have, even if there are, due to this crisis, shifts over the next years. And the challenging over the next 3 decades will be, of course, climate discussions, as well as the digitalization. So with these words, I finish my presentation, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Stefan Tschudin, for your interesting slide and the concrete figures you gave us, but also for your optimistic outlook. Now we have heard the future of the airline and the future of the airport of Zurich. So it is clear. The next question is, what is the future of the ground handling service? And we are proud that Bruno Stefani is here, the Senior President of Swissport International of Germany, Austria, Switzerland. And again, the same question, what will be the future of airport ground services? The floor is yours.
So the future of ground handling, ladies and gentlemen, it's first, we have to get back in the air. We have to master the COVID crisis. This is our focus right now. And it hit us quite a lot, as you can imagine. With getting back in the air, we have to bring together the old processes and the old timings when you used to travel at Zurich Airport, which I believe was still one of the fastest experience around the globe when you travel. I think this, we have to get back to in the air with these old processes and timings, less hurdles, not a lot of documents you have to show when you do the check-in, more clarity that you, when you travel from A to B, that you can return from B to A without being put in quarantine, for example. So as I said, our first focus is getting back in the air by mastering this COVID crisis. In addition, reorganization of Swissport, as some of you might have followed, with Swissport in last year, we have still been owned by Chinese owners. And due to that, we have not been eligible for federal assistance because of this, because of our company structure. So we had to find our own way to get refinanced. We did it successfully, and we managed at the end of the day, and this is the idea, to emerge stronger from the crisis. We do in the background each and everything to reorganize ourselves, to be faster when it comes to decision making on one side, and on the other side as well, of course, to focus on our customers, our airlines. With you heard it before from Tamur when it comes to Swiss, the future. I think we have to be faster there, and we will do everything that we will meet our customers' expectations, not only airlines, but as well passengers. And in this reorganization, we in Switzerland, we are privileged. We thanks to short-time working compensation or economical unemployment, so far we had no mass layoffs to do, and with the increase of the production from 50%, what we heard from Swiss at the hub Zurich, but as well from EasyJet in Basel and Geneva, up to 70%, we foresee that we will have the right number of people to deal with this production peak for the upcoming summer. However, the crisis brought us as well new business like pharma centers on one side. We already started, of course, before the crisis to focus on pharma centers, but we continued, despite the critical funds, we continued to invest in pharma centers throughout our global network. The latest, one of the state-of-the-art pharma centers Swissport is operating is at Basel. So we are able and ready to ensure that the vaccines now spread all over the world are getting there in the quality it's needed. And the other thing, a new business, hopefully only not for the next 10 years, but the testing facility is something Swissport is operating together with Swiss Analysis and Ender Diagnostics. Only in Zürich Airport, we run 4 test centers providing some thousands tests a day these days to ensure hurdless or as hurdless as possible travel in around with the destination we are flying to. When it comes to a little bit after the crisis, it's a continuous improvement, ground handling. We have 4 pillars we are focusing on. First is continuous improvement. What we see is a shift of competencies. Passengers, when they travel, they use more and more to do everything by themselves, meaning Swissport or ground handling companies just are there to support when you have an irregularity, when you have topics, when you will miss your connecting flight. Then this is the shift of competencies that we start to deal then with you and not with transactional processes by deciding if you want to sit in a window or if you want to sit on an aisle. But as well, we try to digitalize processes. You see on the screen a picture of a mobile boarding app, which is already now up and running, especially in infrastructure areas where you don't have a lot of passenger, not enough space. You have easily suddenly a possibility to board passengers without being dependent on airport infrastructure. You have there a different possibility and the simplification of the overall process. The other thing is the employee. As you can imagine, the aircrafts we have today, these will be the aircrafts of the next 10 to 20 years. So there will be still a lot of manual work be required to load the aircraft, and we have to care for the safety of our staff. Imagine you have to load a lot of bags in a narrow area, then you have to protect your bag. We want to help our staff to protect themselves, so we use exoskeleton to guide the movements on one side, and on the other side, latest technology is here. Swissport is using augmented reality as well as virtual reality. When it comes to trainings, we do some blended trainings with different kind of methodologies to help our people to really get ready when they are once outside and once are there, be it for passenger service or be it for loading or unloading aircrafts. Service equipment, Stefan mentioned it before, zero emissions. We will have 50% of all our equipment all over the Swissport network by hybrid or even electrical powered in already 2025. Just Swissport in Zurich is investing 3 million a year in new technology, less emission, or if it's possible, zero emission with a lot of GSE, this ground service equipment being electrically powered. But as well, zero damages to the aircrafts, zero damages as well to our equipment, and of course to our staff. we use the same technology as the car industry already does for years. We install to our equipment sensors and all that stuff that approaches an aircraft without hitting the aircraft or even damaging the aircraft. And the outlook even further, in line with what Stefan Tschudin said, we have this airport operation center where Swissport brings in a data cube. Data cube is something which we intend to analyze about 150 key performance indicators at the same time, to not only steer day-to-day operation, but as well to analyze the past and of course to project the future. A huge project, very interesting because big data is used, and here you can see the advantage of a ground handler. Often the ground handler has unique data neither the airports nor airlines have. So we try, of course, to be part of the airport operations center and to have these data exchange with the partners. And a little bit further, not on the slide, imagine self-driving vehicles at the Zürich Airport or generally at airports around the world, as well as one of my dreams, having aircraft loading more or less fully automated. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I think our audience can really be happy. We have such a lot of concrete outlooks for the future of the aviation industry. And we are 4 panelists here in the studio in St. Gallen, but we have one more, and he is virtually connected to us. It is Marc Hamy, the Vice President Corporate Affairs, Sustainability and Environment of Airbus. And I hope, Marc, you can hear us and the connection is good. And we can have also a keynote of you. And our question now is, how is the short-term challenge of OEMs with long-term perspective? Marc, the connection is good. You have the microphone open.
Thank you very much for inviting me to this very interesting symposium, and sorry to not be with you. I hope that very soon we can fly everywhere and have the pleasure to have such a symposium, not only in virtual meetings, but physically. As we have seen in the beginning of this symposium, we have 2 major challenges ahead of us to recover from the COVID crisis, which is probably the most severe crisis ever, and to prepare the future. I do believe that we cannot predict the future, but we can try to shape it. And this is clearly the objective of Airbus as one of the major players in this aviation sector. We used to say we want to pioneer sustainable aerospace for a safe and united world. Because first, we do believe that aviation is a force for good in the world. It connects people. It's a factor for peace. And we do believe so after COVID, there will be a large place for aviation at large. So aircraft, commercial aircraft, but also satellites can be very useful in controlling the evolution on Earth of the climate and so on. And we do believe that defense is essential to preserve our democracy and safety of people. So we will try to show you how we want to address this challenge, knowing that at the very beginning of this symposium, you reminded us the history and the beginning of the aviation in St. Gallen. It's good to look at the past. We do believe that what we have to achieve ahead of us is very similar to this very early age of aviation. It's really a step change. So we have to manage this step change with the same feeling of innovation and pioneer spirit. First of all, of course, as a world company and large group, environment and social governance is at the core of Airbus strategy. We have here the 4 pillars of this ESG strategy for Airbus. Lead the journey towards clean aerospace is what I will develop then, but also respect human rights, foster inclusion, build our business on the foundation of safety and quality, and exemplify business integrity. So let's move to the next slide, which is really about how we see the future of aerospace. It has been said we are facing most of the most challenging crises ever, but we can see some positive signs. Now, first of all, with the rolling out of the vaccination in a lot of countries, we can expect that many countries in the world will reach immunity very soon. 70% or so of the population in Western countries should be fully vaccinated. And we can see the pandemic is going down in these countries. Of course, it's a global issue, and so vaccination will have also to grow rapidly in the rest of the world. I heard yesterday that Europe is planning to provide 50% of the production of its vaccines to the rest of the world, which is, of course, good news, so that the other countries in the West can catch up on vaccination, which is really the best way to go out from this pandemic. We can see also that domestic flights are back. 100% in some countries like China, Russia, Korea, more than 70% in the US, a little bit less in Europe, but you have seen that Europe is preparing for reopening its borders internally and externally. And so domestic flight is back, but the situation is not that good on the international flights, only 30% today. And so the efforts will come from this reopening, especially with the recommendation of ICAO and the use of digital pass to allow people with a negative PCR test or vaccination, fully vaccinated, can fly again totally freely, and it will happen. So we have seen some perspective on long term. I have seen Eurocontrol planning for this year and already 80% of traffic at the end of this year. So we trust that as soon as the pandemic will decrease, the traffic will be back. And we can see that only 3% of the people are not prepared to fly again, and more than 50%, 57% are prepared to fly within 2 months, according to the last IATA survey. So we trust people will be back in the air. This is why at Airbus, after deciding last year to decrease our capacity by 40%, we are preparing for progressively increase again this capacity to provide the last generation of aircraft to our customers. We just stopped the production for 4 days in Airbus. At the peak of the crisis, it was to maintain Airbus production, but the whole supply chain alive and ready for recovering. And this decision, I think, has been critical, even if a lower rate, to maintain the global aviation sector alive and be ready for a restart. We expect this restart coming soon, in the coming months, in the coming years, and so we are ready for that. Now, next slide, we have to prepare the future, and so to build a sustainable aviation. You have here the ATAG objective. So this is the objective of the global aviation industry. We have seen the project of airlines, airport, air navigation services, and manufacturers. And so the objective is, as a minimum, to halve emission by 2050 and to reach carbon neutrality in 2060, 2065. Next slide. How to achieve this? We have a panel of solutions, technology and design. I will develop this later. We can still improve the design of our aircraft. We have to use new fuels. I will explain why we are turning in Airbus to hydrogen and, of course, sustainable aviation fuel that are very promising solutions to decarbonize aviation. For a while, we still market-based measure, ETS, CORSIA. We also have to improve operations. The ATM can reduce emission by 10%. and as we have seen also, of course, airport and infrastructure operation. Next slide. Next slide, please. So on the left, you have the trajectory of aviation according to ATAG. So it's a ATAG Waypoint 2050, and that's been published last year. And you can see the different components of the solutions. In blue, you have the technology. What can bring the new technologies in reducing aviation emission. And you can see that it's close to 50%. Depending on different assumptions, it can reach to between 40 and 50%. It's what we call ultra-efficient aircraft with better design, better efficient engines, and the switch, as I will explain, to really new fuel as hydrogen. And in green, you have sustainable aviation fuel. And you can see the contribution of sustainable aviation to this decarbonization. Today, our aircraft are already certified for 50% of incorporation of sustainable aviation fuel. And I could say a good aviation, sustainable aviation fuel can reduce CO2 emission by 80%, even 85%. So for 55% incorporation, it's a 40% less emissions. And we plan to go to 100% incorporation around the years 2030 to still increase the reduction. On the right part, you have the destination 2050, which is a trajectory of European aviation. And you can see that we are supporting the Green Deal with the objective of being carbon neutral in 2050. Here again, with technology, but perhaps going faster in Europe, and sustainable aviation fuel, and also market-based measure, residual market-based measure, probably still needed in 2050, CORSIA, offsetting coming from airlines and EU ETS, because we have a specific market-based measure in Europe. Next slide. Already today, our last generation of aircraft are improving the performance by 20 to 25%, and only 12% of the international fleets are equipped with this last generation of aircraft. So the first things to do is clearly this renewal of the fleet with this last generation. It will bring 20 to 25% less emission. If you look at the past, in 30 years, we already improved the performance and reduced the emission per passenger kilometer of emission by 50%. So 50% less in the last 30 years, still 50% to do in the 30 coming years to reach carbon neutrality. So we think that according to this track record of our last 30 years, we can achieve this. And this last generation of aircraft, from the 320neo to the 330neo and 350, is of course giving trust in our capacity to still increase. You know, we published last year the gram of CO2 per passenger kilometer. On the whole deliveries of Airbus, it's 63 grams per kilometer, much better than many cars. Next slide, please. So as I said, we want to pioneer sustainable aviation, and we want especially to introduce the first zero-emission aircraft, commercial aircraft, by 2035. Next slide. How can we plan it? This project is mainly based on hydrogen. Why hydrogen? We do believe that the world of the past was governed by oil as the main source of energy, but in the future, oil will not be allowed anymore. And so everything will be based on low carbon sources of energy, and mainly electricity. Today, 80% of the energy is provided by oil. Tomorrow, 80% of the energy will be provided by green electricity. And this is true for transport as well. The problem is wind energy, solar energy cannot be stocked and distributed easily. And so you need something in between to stock the energy and to transport it. And the most powerful and efficient way to do it is hydrogen. We are member of the Hydrogen Council, and we can see this movement everywhere in the world. And hydrogen will be for trucks, for ships, for a lot of industry, of course, green hydrogen. So the tomorrow world will be the hydrogen world, replacing fuel, replacing oil. And we have to connect aviation to this new world. Plus the fact that, of course, in aviation, what is very important is the power that can be delivered by a fuel. And hydrogen is 4 times more powerful than oil. The handicap of hydrogen is the volume. But regarding the weight, compared to the power delivered, it's 4 times better than oil. And so we do believe that hydrogen will be the solutions to develop a zero-emission aviation tomorrow. And we have decided to accelerate the programs to be able to deliver one of these solutions by the years 2035. So hydrogen can be used in very different ways. It could be directly burned in an engine. It can be used as a producing electricity, fuel cells, to power an engine. And it can be also used by mixing green hydrogen with carbon capture for a synthetic fuel. And the synthetic fuel will deliver in the atmosphere the CO2 that has been captured, and so will be carbon neutral. And of course, synthetic fuel is a sustainable aviation fuel, so it can fly in all aircraft, and tomorrow with aircraft that will be certified for 100% incorporation of this fuel. So hydrogen will be at the basis of all the solutions for the decarbonized aviation tomorrow. Next slide. Now for short to medium aircraft, we think that we can directly use hydrogen according to 3 concepts. So we are studying today 3 possible solutions. A turbofan, so I would say classical Airbus aircraft with up to 200 passengers, powered by hydrogen engines, with a range superior to 2,000 nautical miles, and of course, a liquid hydrogen storage and distribution. A turboprop with a shorter range, a shorter capacity, but that will be also propelled by hydrogen, and a bladed wing aircraft, which is a very interesting solution because this design as such is very efficient. And of course, as there are more volume for the same capacity, it's a good way to store hydrogen on board and perhaps have a longer range. So you can see that from the time being for 2035, we consider a range around 2,000 nautical miles. Next generation could allow to go for longer range, but for existing long-range aircraft, we will use sustainable aviation fuel and synthetic fuels with 80 to 100% reduction of CO2 emissions. Next slide, please. Hydrogen at airports. Of course, to use hydrogen, we need to fuel aircraft with hydrogen. We think that in this new world, where hydrogen will be used by many users, and especially transport. I have seen 6 months ago a bus coach in Toulouse, which was propelled by hydrogen only. A lot of trucks, vehicle on the airports will be able to use hydrogen. And so the plan is to work with the airports to make airports hydrogen hubs, first for ground transport and then for aircraft. And of course, we invite them to participate to the development of this new world, new energy and green world, to develop capabilities, knowledge on hydrogen, to be able to manage stock and distribute this new source of energy. We have just signed such an agreement with Zürich Airport in France. Next slide, please. Sustainable aviation fuel, as you have seen in ATAG, waypoint 2050 and destination 2050, it will be 50% of the global solution. And so we are pushing, of course, for the development of SAF, supporting the mandate in the Green Deal. You know that USA is incentivizing now the use of SAF by airlines with $1.5 to $2 per gallon credit tax to really support airlines to put on board. So today our aircraft are certified for 50% SAF incorporation, and we are planning 100% SAF incorporation in the near future. We have started a campaign of tests with the 350 here in Toulouse to test everything to be ready to such certification before the years 2030, so quite soon. Next slide. So key takeaways. First, we do believe in the future of aviation because it's a force for good and for people. You know that 300 million of people are separated from their native nation today. And of course, people like to travel, and this is something really for the modern economy, for the modern way of life. But to be able to do so, we have to be fully sustainable, which means fully decarbonized. And so to maintain this global benefit to society, to allow next generation to keep on flying in a full respect of environment, step changes are needed in technologies and ways of flying to address the climate change issue. This is what we have ahead of us, and as Airbus, we are totally engaged in this, but we have seen with ATAG that the global aviation industry is committed to this. Airports are committed to carbon neutrality in 2050. A lot of airlines are committed, and we are supporting this step change. We think that hydrogen is one of the most promising solutions for our aircraft because it will also be part of a global economy governed by hydrogen, and we need to connect aviation to this new world. And so we have launched all R&D and development needed to try to be ready in the next decade for this step change. But it will need a collective effort. It's not only aircraft manufacturers. Of course, we need the support of the nations to develop the global infrastructure for hydrogen production and distribution. As I said, we need to work with the airports. And of course, we need to work with the airlines, and more airlines are interested in this project and to work both of SAF development and prepare the future with new sources of energy, hydrogen. Governments will have a crucial role in engaging both state and industry. This is what we can see in the Green Deal in Europe, and we can see also in the US. And of course, ICAO, the worldwide organization, will have a key role. You probably know that there is an assembly next year to discuss this on the long-term aspirational goal to define the future of aviation and allow everyone in the world, industry and governments to work together to deliver this fully decarbonized aviation. Thank you very much.
Very much, Marc Hamy. Now I understand fully why you are not only Vice President for Public Affairs, but also for Sustainability and Environment at Airbus. It's really impressive. How are the plans from Airbus for not only reduction of CO2, but also introduce hydrogen in the next years? So I'm sure we'll have a lot of questions from our audience. Don't hesitate, ask your questions via the chat. We have already got a lot of questions for you, for our panelists. And let me start with your first question now already to Andreas Wittmer. I know it is a surprise for you, but nevertheless, the first one is, are there plans for the channel aviation for the next year? to get out of this pandemic?
Well, yes, we did some work actually. We didn't focus very much on the pandemic, but we looked at how the general aviation will have to move forward with respect to the topics on the table, which was addressed by Airbus, by Marc just before. I think what we have seen in the past year in general aviation, when we look at business aviation, in tourism in Europe, we have seen that some regional airports had even more traffic than before. Some regional airports like in the Engadine, there has been positive development, not with all kinds of traffic, but especially small props have grown, then jets have grown, whereas some turboprops have less grown or have not grown or have been reduced. Helicopter work has probably been reduced slightly. So we overall, the balance at some of the airports that live from general aviation is not so bad. So there might be some, but the ones I have seen, they have not an extremely bad balance, not as bad a balance as we see in public aviation at big hub airports and public transport kind of airports. So I guess that there is a problem, but it's more on the intercontinental level. On the regional level, within the country or within Europe, the problem is much, much smaller.
Thank you very much, Andreas, the Managing Director of the Center for Aviation Competence. And there is another question to Tamur Goudarzi Pour, the CCO of Swiss International. Swiss is depending on feeder services from Europe. How will Swiss ensure that losing not too many of those important connecting travelers?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think crisis has shown that when you actually have to reduce your first concentrate on the point-to-point traffic. So in the middle of the crisis, you know, we have flown maybe 5% of our original 2019 capacity, beginning of the first months of the pandemic. This will forth and back, bring people back home, and of course cargo flights as well. This was the first initial impetus. So once you have overcome that situation of just point to point, you need to rebuild your hub structure. It means you need to rebuild your banks which connecting in Zurich. Earlier, and now with the different waves of the pandemic, this is something that comes with a delay, but it comes with a force. That means we double our capacity now in the months of June to July, basically, or from May to July, let's say, but still at 50%. 50% still means that you cannot have the frequencies that you had before. So you can cater, on the one hand, of course, for all people who want to go to a destination by having as many destinations as possible, but you need to make compromises on the number of frequencies. Still, you would connect all those important European cities in the main bank structure to the intercon traffic and to the other European flights. And by focusing on those banks, you will be able to create connectivity. On top, of course, we still cater for our business clientele by offering the big metropolises in Europe, minimum as a day return travel. That means 2 times daily, morning, evening. That's something we're growing into right now, so that this is possible again, which was not during the pandemic. And we had even business people driving the car for 6 hours in one direction in order to get there where they want to go. So this is something which goes in stages, and you have to make certain compromise on the frequency. And this will stay with us for a while, but to connect the main cities in Europe and the main cities in the world is something we do already now, and we will be able to do also with a 50% capacity scenario.
Thank you very much. There is another question in the same direction, but this time it's going to Stefan Tschudin, the COO of Zürich Airport. Will leisure carrier get more under pressure, and what will be the percentage between business and leisure travelers in the future?
If we all would know that already, then it would be easier to prepare for the future. But of course, I guess as I mentioned during my short speech, the business travel will probably be the last part of the travel that will come back, and we will have in the short term more leisure travel, especially the so-called VFR travelers. We in aviation use VFR or used VFR for visual flight use to visit friends and relatives, and this is already now. This was the first. These were the first passengers coming back, and the international connectivity, the globalization hasn't changed with this pandemic. So this is for sure a short part that will also in a short term coming back. And as I mentioned also, I'm convinced even if there is less business travels, they will come back. So probably in a short term, there will be more leisure traffic compared with business travelers. On a long-term view, I guess both segments will grow again.
If I understood you correctly, in your keynote, you said you estimate that we will be back on normal figures up to 6 and 7 years. Is this correct?
Normal figures, which means passengers around 31 million as we had 2019. Yes, that's correct.
Exactly. Now I'm very interesting, Andreas Wittmer. Do you see it also in this time period?
Yes, I think that time horizon makes a lot of sense. And you see a lot of statistics also produced by the organizations like the Airport Council International or also the IATA that look at the data on a global scale. I think we start with low business travel because it's just taking longer to come back. Then we have the second wave coming, which is about sustainability and all the kind of companies that want to put the sustainability flag on top of their headquarters, and they will probably have new arrangements concerning business travel, and that will probably be a second wave on top of this, which will hit. But then the general growth of the aviation demand is a given on a global scale. Aviation demand is going to grow, so maybe we have more business traveler in the future, but each of them travels less. But in total, over the next 5, 6 years or 7 years, I also believe that we will come back to a 2019 level, also on the business travel level. But the start will be slow and probably much faster on the leisure side. And that's, of course, a huge challenge because we all know that the business travelers are financing quite a part of the operations and have less price sensitivity and book later and buy business class and all that. And that makes, of course, a big difference to restart the business if you have to start with low business travel demand.
Thank you very much. There is another question to Bruno Stefan. There is an audience, I think, who is very impressed that even without federal help with your shareholders from China, you managed to have enough capital. And the question is, Swissport and other ground handling providers are depending on passengers and cargo traffic without direct influence on the demand. How do you mitigate such a risk and how to stay resilient in a global crisis?
Well, especially these crises, we saw the shift from passengers to cargo. We had the Swiss International Airlines, one of the many airlines converting aircrafts, transporting yesterday passengers and today parcels all over. So we could mitigate the crisis by, well, partly mitigate, I must say, the crisis impact by seeing more cargo being transported within our global network. But to mitigate such a huge impact, I think, unfortunately, it's not so easy to mitigate it. It comes to pure crisis management, and there I would say the close cooperation with Swiss International Airlines on one side, but with all our other customers all over the world, and on, of course, the airport of Zurich in the Zurich case, but as well Geneva and Basel, helped us a lot to align our decisions and try to mitigate as high as possible. But at the end of the day, we will see huge costs sitting at Swissport, and we will continue to produce negative results. And we are thus in discussion with all stakeholders to find a way how to overcome that and to how to be fast back in figures where everybody can say this is a business.
Thank you very much. There is another question to Stefan Tschudin, because you mentioned that you got 900 millions of new share capital. Yes, that's correct. And we have a question from the audience. Zürich Airport, along with other international hubs, have been showing financial resilience in the last 16 months. Is the business model of multi-models hub a key for long-term success of airports?
I'm sure that will be a key for the success also in the future, as it has been during the last decades. And as we heard from Tamur, they are rebuilding their network, and the network as a hub airline, we will already see that this summer, with again peaks that are not already the same, but near to the peaks that we had summer 19, even if passengers all over are down by 40 to 50%. And I'm sure that this will come back, and the business model to have the long haul concentrated at the hub as it was before will be the same after this crisis again. So this business model will be successful also for the future.
Okay, now that is for the multi-hub airports. What do you think is the future for the regional airports in Switzerland? Because Andreas and we have made a lot of studies for and owner plans for these regional airports, and it is very difficult for them. So what do you think?
Yes, also due to the political discussions about climate and aviation, it will be even more difficult during the next years for the small regional airports, as Lugano Altenrhein has a own airline. Is probably a special case, and even Bern. That will be difficult in Switzerland. Switzerland is a small country, and the distances also between Bern, Basel, or is too close that I really see a successful business model for this small regional airport. It's more a political decision of the local community if they want to have a regional airport, and then they have to support it.
Thank you very much for this quite open answer. You see, Andreas, we could make also another kick-off meeting just for this question, but there is another one now for Bruno Stefani. How does the transition of Swissport towards carbon neutrality and environmental sustainability look like, with a differentiation on timeline and geography? Because we have heard now, Marc Hamy, what Airbus is doing. What are your plans?
Well, we have about 290 stations around the world. And there, of course, we have a very different kind of when it comes to environmental protection. What we aim to do is what I mentioned in my presentation. Until 2025, we will see 50% of all equipment either hybrid or electrically powered. And I think this is the way forward, that every time we invest in new equipment, we shall look for equipment which is the most economical friendly, environmental friendly, of course, and yes, and I think this is the way forward. And to see 2050, I think this is a realistic goal as well for Swissport, that we try to be there as well in a zero emission environment together with the airport or with Airbus.
Marc, you see, you have given a lot of questions. We see them here. I will come back to the next here for you, Marc. Airbus and the industry growth models and predictors in the last 25 years seemed very accurate, but also stable on a global scale. Is there a need for update demand pattern and forecast models with respect to the way they worked until 2020?
Thank you. Regarding the demand forecast, I think we are all looking at it, and we all do believe, I think, that aviation will be back. And we have seen in aviation reports as a Waypoint 2050 as destination, there will be an impact, but it's not so big impact. So when we need to plan for the future, I think everybody said that there is a very strong demand, and the fact that I mentioned that 57% of the passenger of aviation are ready to fly again within 2 months, once that the demand is there. And everybody is expecting the sky to reopen as soon as the pandemic is under control. So we do believe that there will be an increase in the future. Now, what we are proposing is a license to grow, which means that aviation will not be allowed to grow anymore if we are not fully sustainable. This is a key challenge. So people want to fly, but they want to fly according to the objective of the Paris Agreement, so in a decarbonized aviation. And this is when we are accelerating this transition, because we know that the pressure coming from climate change will be increasing in the coming months, year. We will have the COP26 at the end of the year, and it's a race against climate change. So we have to be part of it. Passengers are ready to fly. Companies are ready to fly if they can show that they fly in perfect respect of the environment. And this is a challenge, but if we are able to do so, I think there is no reason why people will not fly again, and young generation, older generation, business, leisure, and so on. So this is our challenge as aviation, and all the aviation industry must be like to deliver this in the coming months and years.
Where the figures are coming from, the 3% will not resume an air travel, but 57% will resume air travel in the next 2 months. So you have seen perhaps Tamur Goudarzi Pour this nice question that the media of Lettland will make an article about Swiss, and they are asking you for your contact and if you are open for an interview. I hope you will be. The next question I have here is about the investments. You mentioned Stefan Tschudin as CEO for the Zürich Airport. What are the risks of making investments with a 10 or 20-year scope in mind, and has the risk management change to the learnings from the COVID pandemic? That's a question I'm interested in personally, because I have been the chair of the risk management committee at SR Technics, and we had the pandemic on the master risk list, but the financial impact was not so high as we have seen it now. What do you see?
That was the same in our risk management. We had, of course, this pandemic as a major risk on the list, and on the other side, we couldn't expect the financial impact that we had during the last year, as this crisis has now lasted for more than 1 year. So we couldn't expect financial impact. We were well prepared. We had a stable financial situation before the crisis, and I guess the daily operation and the daily management of this crisis, based on our emergency plans, went well. And of course, the preparation also on the financial side was, well, as I mentioned, we couldn't expect. And I guess what can we improve in the future when we are probably coming to a next pandemic crisis? And we haven't been so well connected to the health organizations and the discussions with the health organization. And what I think, they are not used to think on a risk-based basis. We are used in aviation to handle risk-based approaches and to live with residual risks. And this hasn't been the case with the health organization. And that's led to this shutdown, to be on the safe side. And I guess there we can be better prepared for next to be able to have at least a minimum of traffic connections, especially also within Europe. Now this time, all the European countries just closed the borders, and there must be political discussions how we can better prepare us for a next such a situation.
I think all the panelists agree to that. Okay. We have another question to Marc Hamy. What are the concrete actions to make the supply chain more resilient at Airbus? What do you think, or can you say, Marc, to this question?
Yes, thank you for the question. The supply chain has demonstrated that this supply chain was extremely resilient. You know, in 2020, we decided to cut the production by 40%. We take the decision very soon in the crisis, and the whole supply chain, which means thousands of companies of supply chain, adapted to this situation in a very short period. They were resilient in two things: adapting the level of production to the situation, to the pandemic, and also maintaining the supply chain despite the COVID, which means implementing a lot of safety measures for our staff to allow them to work safely during COVID period and so on. So I think this supply chain has demonstrated a very high resilience. I think the question is more on the global resilience of the air transport sector in front of such a crisis. What is interesting is to see that, especially when discussing with ICAO, we had a very united aviation. OEMs, airlines, we all work together, airports, to define a safe journey for the passengers from the very beginning of the travel to the end. And we have demonstrated that we could ensure a safe travel for these passengers. And ICAO has issued a guide for this. And we have implemented everywhere in the world sanitary measures to ensure the highest possible level of safety in our aircraft and all along the journey of a passenger. But as just said now, it didn't allow a full reopening of the borders because of the risk of new variants and so on. And probably, even if ICAO is working with the WHO closely, but it was a new disease, and we didn't manage to reach a consensus with health authorities on the best way. We just deliver with IATA, Boeing, and Airbus exactly what has just been said before: a risk assessment methodology to reopen the sky, and this is probably this experience for next time, if such a pandemic could rehappen, to work. Yes, in close hands with health authorities, and also gives them confidence, as aviation is used to safety issue and health issue is part of it. And so we can define together a good strategy to restart. And this is what I think will happen now with the vaccination test, and so I think we are close. OECD delivered one to a well understood and supported way of resuming air transport. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Marc. I think the other question there with the GA plans at Zurich, we have already given the answer. Another question to both of us, by the way, Andreas. It is going to the Center for Aviation Competence and also to the Foundation for Aviation Competence. How has research and academia in general changed with respect to focus areas in commercial aviation and in passenger behavior?
Well, I think the last years, I mean, before the pandemic already, we had a strong move towards this sustainability research and to learn about and to study how we can make aviation more climate friendly. That's definitely one major research area in almost any discipline. I mean, whether it's in the field of technology or whether it's in management, or it is one of the ones. But also consumer behavior and the consumers' needs is a topic. This related also to business model. There was always a discussion about traditional network airlines that offer global networks and have systemic and economic relevance. And there was also the discussion about a lot of more regional traffic, point-to-point models, which is completely different, which are very, let's say, impulsive, very great. They do a lot of good development and create demand. So there was a lot of discussion about that, and also about sustainability again. Like, is it sustainable to have lowest prices published, lowest possible anchor prices to drive supply, kind of, or is that not the way to do business anymore in the future? If not, some business models are dead. And I think these are topics we are discussing and dealing with quite a bit.
Thank you very much. I have to ask, can I have another question, or are we already running out of time? So, because I would like to use the time we have for again, and a special concrete question to Marc Hamy. Listen to me. Assuming we are in the year 2035, you work in a French city without an airport and receiving a call, Mr. Hamy, you need to be in San Francisco in 24 hours or less. How would your multimodal itinerary look like, and how would your travel experience look like?
To go to San Francisco, I take a 350 with synthetic fuels on board, ensuring zero carbon emission, and so direct flight in very comfortable situation, and with zero emission for long range flights. Obviously, we'll not jump from one place to the other, but you know, there is this discussion in aviation about aviation and train. When you look at 2035, you can have a hydrogen aircraft with zero emission. And this aircraft has no impact on land, biodiversity. It doesn't need new routes on the ground. We just use usual infrastructure. When it needs 15 years to build a new high-speed train route. So we can see, and there is a very good report from Deloitte on that, if you project yourself in the future, and the best way to travel with a lower impact in the environment, a zero-emission aircraft is as good as train for emissions and better than train for land and biodiversity.
You could also have said, then I will make a Zoom conference, but that is not the right answer. No, seriously, because that's something we all learned during this pandemic, that Zoom meetings, yes, they are really a good tool. We are using it more frequently than before, but Zoom meetings cannot give an answer to what we need when we really have to make exchanges personally. So I think we will have this personal exchange, and we still need to travel also in 2035. But it is very optimistic then without CO2 and perhaps with hydrogen. So first of all, I have to thank all the participants very much. It was fascinating for me to see your slides. I hope the audience also had really the pleasure to see these concrete figures. I know a lot of preparation, a lot of work behind that, but it was worth to do it because we have really a big audience today, more than perhaps we would have if it was in the Ulma. But Andreas, you have to come to me because we have to make up a wrap up with this panel, and I took out several points. The first one, the financial impact of the whole aviation industry, so the producers, the airline, the airports, the ground handling services, have been huge, more than as we have inspected. We had it on the master risk list, as you told us, but we underestimated the financial impact. Nevertheless, we are optimistic that it will come to an end, that at the end of this year, a lot of travelers will be back again. And in 6 to 7 years, we are again there where we have been in 2019, perhaps even we are further because the mobility is going on. And a Zoom meeting is not replacing everything. And the last thing I'm taking out of that is the reducing of CO2. Stefan Tschudin, as the CEO of Zürich Airport, have begun with that. You want to reduce that to zero. And we have heard Marc Hamy how Airbus is planning to reduce that and to introduce hydrogen. So that I am taking out these points. Andreas, what is your wrap-up?
Well, thanks very much for the great insights. I have a lot of questions, I actually know. That's the academic, right? I would have questions about pricing, about how we getting back into break even, about there's a lot of questions still around because we are still, and we shouldn't forget, in the middle of, I think, the crisis. We are positive because we get vaccines, but there's still quite a way to go. And as we have heard, it takes years to actually get there where this industry will be back to a level which works fine. So we are still in a difficult situation. That's my takeaway. And I think there is a lot of work needed and a lot of, well, as I said, research to be done from my side and a lot of questions that are open, which we have to address. But that was really a pleasure from my side to be here. And I may also make a comment here. You see the slides on what's going on, what we do in the near future at my research center. And I think what you see here on this slide is what happened the last year. The pandemic led us go back to home office. It led us to work in a small little room somewhere, sometimes in the cellar, or even video conferences on the toilet if the children were too loud. You all have experienced it. We moved around, but we produced. And so did many of us. And I think what the result of that year is on that slide. We already did 2 programs with pilots, and we are very proud that we help pilots to actually have a second leg in the market somewhere in management. We have a new Space for Business program, which we do with the Rotterdam School of Management and the Nova School of Business from Portugal, which is has been launched last week. It's a European business management program for space managers up and downstream, but especially downstream. You may have read articles that almost any business gets in connection with space nowadays or within the next 10 years, definitely. Then we have created a Diploma of Advanced Studies program with IATA. That's a cooperation with IATA. So we are, it's a global program with IATA, which is launched in January. Then we had one extra book in our aviation series on crisis communication. Fits very well to what happened in the last year. A lot of communication had to be done on this crisis. Then the Sustainable Aviation book is going to be printed in about, well, it's going into print in about a month. So we are very close to that. I told you, aviation research in the field of sustainability has been there for quite some time, and this is key.
And it has been a lot of work, you have
to say. Oh my God, it is. And then the Aviation Systems book, where Roland is co-editor together with me and Thomas Beeger in our university, is in print. So we did a lot of writing. So a lot happened during COVID-19. The lockdown was turned into productivity. We just tried to work as much as possible. We also tried to get short time work. But if you are a states organization, you cannot. So for this reason, we just had to work, and we had to find a lot of work. And that's what we did. And we are very proud of that. I think it leaves me by saying thank you to all the sponsors. As mentioned before, Some sponsors on the list are just sponsoring this event or have sponsored this last year's event, which should have been in person and is also going into next year's event. And some sponsors are actually sponsoring the series of events we have with the Aerospace Innovation Days, which we are managing. There is also an InnoSwiss project supporting that, these different events that are coming up. So I would like to thank you very, very much to all the sponsors to support us in these times. We are very happy for that. It would have been difficult otherwise, honestly. And it leaves me with the last sentence to save the date for next year's real symposium in St. Gallen, in Olma. And yes, there will be an exhibition, and yes, you can show products, and we will have aperitifs and dinners and coffee breaks, and we'll have time to talk in person. I look very much forward to that. Thank you very much.
And goodbye to all of you. Thank you for your participation.
Thank you.